All right, so in the last demonstration, I gave you an overview of how something could look if you did a mock-up in XD. And so we're going to do a tutorial using XD, but to get started, first, I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and collect the fonts that you want to use, as well as some of the color samples. It'll just make your life a little bit easier. And so in order to do that, what I'm going to recommend then is to go to Google Fonts and go ahead and pick out the ones that you want. And then what you'll do after you select your families is let's say if this is your selection, it'll start off on this page, right? And then you can go over here to customize. And then you're going to need to choose all of the different weights that you might like to use. All right, this is going to be a pretty important thing to do. All right, so you're going to choose the weights that you want to use. And if you think that you want to, let's say you're not sure, you can select a whole bunch of different ones. But here's the thing that you need to be careful about doing is you don't want to select so many because what we're going to do is we're going to download them and you're going to install them in your computer so that you can design with XD. But if you choose a lot and then you end up using a lot of different weights on these different fonts, then your load time is going to go crazy. Right now, the load time is moderate. I might not like even using, for instance, on Railway, I might even not want to have bold. And that would, even though the moderate time didn't change, it still did reduce the time to some degree. So, but just in case, I'm going to go ahead and include bold. And I also included 3 different font weights for Oswald. All right. I'm going to only include the Latin version. Okay, so if you want to see a sample, you can click this little arrow right here, and it takes you to the sample page that has your embed information. It has how you specify it in CSS. But here's the thing, you're not going to actually use this embed information or this CSS information for working in WordPress. I'll show you later what you're going to have to do about that. But for right now, you can just look at these as examples and it shows you some different stuff. And if you wanted, what you could do is you could go here and do a print. So we're going to say print, and you can save this as a PDF. This is a good way of saving out your samples as a PDF, especially if you need to turn in research materials or, hand them over to somebody. And then you can just save it as a PDF and that'll be fine. I'm just going to cancel this for right now. The other thing too that you need to do is open this up, and you want to go ahead and download the fonts. And so right here, you're going to click on the download button. It's going to ask you where you want to put the downloads. And here's the thing, I wouldn't, you can put it with your project resources and stuff, right? But what I would do 2 different things. All right, I'm going to show you. First of all, in my desktop, one of the things that I have is I've got my CE folder. Okay, now that CE folder is one that, remember, it's my Canon Electric folder. That's one where my theme resides. So if I go into WP content and I look into themes, I've got my Top Cat theme here. All right, I'm not going to save it in CE. I just want to be clear, there is something later that you will save in the CE folder, but for right now, we're going to leave that alone. Right now, what I do also have is I have this mock-up folder, and I have another folder that I was putting some stuff in, but I'm going to go into my mock-up folder, and inside of my mock-up folder, I went ahead and I drug in the Canon Electric site information that I had provided to you guys. If you look inside of there, you'll see that it's got, like the page outlines, and these are the kinds of things that maybe you would get from clients or that you would sort of develop from clients, feedback, that kind of stuff that just has some basic information in it. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I made a folder in here called other resources. I'm going to go in here and you'll see that I've got one other thing in here. It's basically a screenshot that I'm going to be able to use for my mockup, and I'm going to save my fonts in here. Okay, now there's some different reasons that I'm doing that. Well, one of those reasons is that way I know which fonts I'm going to use. All right, but then what I would actually do, if this were, if I were you on your computer, let me go back over here And let's go make sure that we're in the right folder so I can go into mockup. Yep. And then I've got this other resources. Now see, here's my zipped up fonts folder. If I open this, what you see is that it went ahead and it produced this fonts folder, and inside of it, it's got Railway and Oswald. Now what I would do is, if this were my computer, I like to keep stuff in my computer that's design related in one singular place. And for instance, I will have it like inside my hard drive. You might have something like this in your documents folder, I don't know. But I keep mine in my hard drive somewhere, and I keep a folder called design folder or design resources, and I've got stuff for images, I've got stuff for video resources that I can use. I also excuse me, have a fonts folder, and this is where I would make a copy of Railway and Oswald or whatever the fonts are that you're using, and I would copy those into that folder where it's never going to change, and then that way I'll always have them on my computer. If I were to, let's say, just add or install these to my computer straight from here, then the problem is that if I ever move these fonts, then what's going to end up happening is that my system won't be able to find the fonts. All right. And so I'm going to leave these here just so if I ever wanted to just take this whole mockup folder and like put it on a hard drive and go work somewhere else on a different computer, I could, or on a thumb drive or whatever. Or if I wanted to send it to somebody I was working with, then I could do that. But I also want to make sure that I have a copy of these fonts somewhere on my computer where I'm not going to delete them or move them or something like that, because I don't ever want to have to find them again or, go and download them again. So what I would do is I would copy these two things, right? I would just go ahead, copy these two items, and then find the place that you normally keep them. All right, and I can show you. Right, so if I went into the place that I normally keep them, right, I've got a thing called fonts, and then I even organize mine insofar as I've got different font collections, and I keep my Google fonts together as Google fonts. And so this is where I would paste them. One of the things that if you were to pay attention though, in my file system, I already have Oswald, and I have a lot of the fonts actually, and I already have Railway, so I'm not going to paste them here because I already have them here. But what you would then do if you're on a Mac, okay, is you would go into Font Book. Okay, and I would go into Font Book, and I create different collections over here. I already have a collection called Google Fonts. You can right click and say new collection and call it whatever you want. And then all I did was I took the place where I had it in my file system, I took this and I drug it over here and dropped it, and then that automatically adds the font and it will activate the font. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in the newer Apple operating systems, I've seen with some consistency, is that it also will then give you a warning telling you that the font might be corrupted, and you have to check off a thing that says, yeah, I don't care, go ahead and install it. I've been doing that now for like 2 years because I've been having that problem consistently, and the fonts are not corrupt. They're okay. So I know that's not like a thing that's probably going to give you a lot of satisfaction, but anyway, that is generally the truth. Now, if you're on Windows, wherever you're going to ultimately keep them, you can right click it, and there's a place where you can click that's going to say install font, and so you can go and install the font. You might have to actually go to the font itself and right click and install the font, not just the folder. All right, but that's how you install the font in Windows. Okay, so anyway, that's how you will install the font so that you can then use it in an application like XD or Illustrator, or Photoshop, or whatever. Okay, so now that we're done with that, the other thing I want to show you is if you go to Paletton.com, it's Paletton.com. This is a really great website, and it really helps you identify colors inside of color schemes, using really good traditional sound color scheme principles, so that you're not just haphazardly and randomly picking color. And so it's also really good, especially like if you have a base color and you want to start from that. And you can go ahead and enter the base color down here, right? And you can enter that, and then it will give you something like you can do a monotone or a monochrome color scheme, or you can do a adjacent color scheme, which is also referred to as analogous. You can do a triadic color scheme, just 3 colors that are typically, quite often they're across, they're in a triangulation format across from each other on the wheel. On the color wheel, they're not always perfectly even, so you can start to get also even like kind of approximate complementaries sometimes. You can do a tetrad, which is 4 colors. Now, a tetrad also, you'll notice up here it doesn't have complementary, but one of the things that you can do, if you notice in a tetrad, you've got 4 colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. And so if you look at any 2 of these given colors, they're going to be directly across each other from the color wheel, which is by definition what a complementary color is right across the color wheel from the other color. Okay, so but complementary, typically you're just going to have 2 colors in a complementary scheme, although in this tetrad it consists of basically 2 sets of complements. Okay, so that's sort of like your general basic rundown about color schemes and the way they work on a color wheel. The center section is going to allow you to adjust the darks and the lights. So if I unlock that, you can choose some other color that's on here. Like if I go here and I wanted to see, I want to base it off of this and I want to adjust. For instance, if I hold down the shift key, I can start to adjust where these things go. I can move them so that you notice over here in the swatch panel, they're starting to become more contrasty, and then if I move them this way, they have less contrast, for instance. And then if I hold down the shift key, you see I can move them out of sync with each other, right? So anyway, I can move them to the super saturated side. This is very saturated, or to the very desaturated, and you see it goes to grayscale, right? And then right in the center is sort of, those are the tone, or excuse me, those are the tones. They are a middle tone, so that you see that they have very low contrast. They're kind of a little muddy because they have both black and white added to them. So if I wanted that to be a little bit more saturated, I could start to grab this and pull them to the more saturated side, right? And then if I wanted it to have a brighter white, see up here, I can move it up towards the top a little bit more, and you see that I get more saturation, and then I get these other colors. Anyway, so that's how you can start to adjust some of this, and then if you want, you can come back here and you can lock that and say, okay, that's where I want to keep my color scheme, whatever, right? You can also take these and you can move them around, right? One thing that you need to be aware of that you can't do is you can't hit the undo key like you're used to doing in things like Photoshop and Illustrator and pretty much every other application there is. There is no Command or Control Z to undo whatever you just did. So it's important that if you get sort of a sweet spot in here, that you might want to go and either share the palette or export the tables. If you click on that export tables, you can save this out as HTML, and it will save out the page for you so that you can always refer to these color samples. And that's a really good way to basically keep a web page that's going to be good for you to go and just copy the color samples and see what they look like and stuff, right? Okay, so one of the things you'll notice is I just reset my screen. To do that, if you take everything after Paladin.com and you just hit delete and then hit return, it'll reset the page. And what it does to reset it is it puts the hue at 0, which is a pure red. Anytime you look at a color picker, you're going to see that hue is red if it's like a pure red if it's 0 or if it's 360, because it's looking at this as a geometric radial shape with 360 degrees, right? If you remember your geometry. Anyway, and so, and it's automatically sets it to monochrome. Mono meaning one, chroma meaning color. So one color plus black and white, right? That's monochrome. Okay, so it resets it there. And what we can do is we need something to base it off of. If we want to look at artwork, like if your client gives you artwork, like a brand or a logo, we can go under logos and font. By the way, the font here is, you don't have to use this. This was one that I'd provided for you earlier for the first project, but you don't have to use it for this. You can use whatever font you want. Anyway, but I don't want you to redesign the logo. I want you to use the logo that's provided. And you'll see that there are two different sets. There's the sets that have red, okay? And if red is scary to you, clients will not normally do this, right? But I am going to allow you to use not the red, right? So if red is kind of scary to you, you can use these logos as a basis that have the that basically don't have the red behind it, right? Otherwise they're the same. And if you want to use that, then you can choose some other scheme. But if you do that, what I would recommend is that you take this and open it in Photoshop and go, take a color picker like the eyedropper tool, and eyedrop this and get the hexadecimal number so that you can base it off of this from that yellow that's on the interior. You can also do that in a browser as well, I guess. But and so I've already done that, and so I'm just going to go here down where it says base color. See down here in the corner, and I'll click here, and I'm just going to paste that hex number, and then you see that it gives me this bright yellow. Okay, now I kind of find that to be a little bit too bright. Even some of the darker versions of that yellow are too bright, and the lighter versions are almost pure white. So, and if you look, it's because the center section, they're up along the top perimeter in the area where it goes from, just starts to get a little bit saturated to the brightest of white, where it's starts becoming desaturated. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to recommend, just to get these values down so I have a little more saturation and a little bit more darkness, is that I'm going to take this last one here and I'm going to start to drag it down. If you drag it down too far, it's going to go all wonky and crazy. And I'm going to just kind of pull that down, and then I'm going to take this one right here, this darker one, and start to pull it out. And you'll see that as I kind of gradually drag it out, you'll see what happens is that it starts to take me back to this sort of normal base place where these values can go. And that's kind of what I want. All right. And if you were to go back to resetting it, like for instance, let me just show you something. I'm going to just duplicate this tab so I can show you. Let's reset this one just for point of comparison. See how close these all start in the center? They're equidistant, right? And if you kind of blew this up, right, you could start to see that it goes, dead center basically to this 1, 2 intersection, 3, and then it's like halfway in the like 3.5 intersection. And if you wanted it to kind of have this basic like equilibrium of color, you could see how far these are spaced apart. You could actually, start to do that if you wanted. You could pull these in a little bit, right? And then you could pull it in so that it starts to be an intersection that is a little bit more representative, all right, kind of the way that it was. And then you see that these start looking like that. All right, now that's still our base color, and it starts almost to look like a sort of a pukey green, right? Because we're in this green yellow area. If you want to take that, you can start to give it a little bit more saturation. Possibly you could even start to drag it out a little bit and change, how bright it gets and stuff like that. And, if you want to kind of keep some of the original bright color, you could kind of come up in this region. But you'll notice that I haven't changed the basic hue, right? It's still, the hue is 122. I'm going to try to always leave that the same, because then it's still going to be based off that same hue that was in the original logo. Now, if I wanted to make a copy of that, like as it is right now, one of the things that I could do is I could do a share my palette, and I could I could export this or whatever, edit, view examples, export, and more. If you click on that, it takes you back, right? But then you can go to tables, export, and then just as the base monochrome color, if you want to not have to get back to this in case you mess it up, you can go and you can export this as HTML, right? And you could save this file like that. You could just save it down just like that. And so I just want to show you some kinds of ways, because just so you know, in this web app you can't do Control or Command Z to undo. Once you make some change and you didn't pay attention to what your values were, it's not going to just go back to what it was. And so I want to look at a 3-color option, and kind of see if maybe analogous would be the right thing, or maybe the triad would be the right thing. These seem super saturated and a little bit too robust. These might be a little bit better. The only thing about it though is that I think that I might not want this green. I might want something that's a little bit more conservative, like a blue color. Well, in order for me to do that, all right, I can't just grab this and start dragging it, because if I do, then it's going to drag all of these colors with it. What I need to do is come up here um, to this, where it's this gear icon, it says freestyle. And what I need to do now is if I hold down shift, I can individually move some of the colors out. And I think I might start to like, this a little bit better. All right. And it starts to get a little further away from that golden color on the color wheel, and in such a way that I think that it might actually work well. And I could take this gold, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I just barely shifted it. So if I change the base hue back to 121, all right, it'll fix it for me. All right, now if I click this, and it keeps doing it, darn it. Let's try that again. I'm going to hold down shift this time first, and then click and drag. And then I can start to sort of move this in a little bit oranger, and it starts to be a little bit closer to being a complement of the blue. And the other thing too is that I might even want to adjust these internal tones. And I can also, by the way, I can take the, I'm going to take this, I'm going to make it so it comes out just a little bit more, so it's a little bit, got a little bit more red in it. And maybe I'll adjust this so that some of the lighter colors start to come out. I can adjust this a little bit. All right, so that I can get some of these brighter colors that are up inside of here. All right, and then I can, I can continue to kind of tweak and adjust this as necessary. And then if I want to desaturate just a little bit, I can pull that down, pull this out. And I'm also paying attention to some of these other samples, not just the big primary area, right? I'm taking those into consideration. Anyway, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I sort of like this bright color that's in the logo, and then I'm not sure, some of these blues are good, and then I think I like this combination of this gold and then this gold, and I'm not sure exactly how I might use those, but I could see one of these maybe being a background header where this is the logo and maybe this is I don't know, the menu bar or something like that. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to tables export, and I'm going to save this out as HTML. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and actually save this down to my file system. So if I go File, Save Page As, and then this way I'll have it to work with even if something happens on the network. All right, and so inside of other resources, I'm going to save my color palette there. All right, and that gives me a place where I can just go and like copy, some of these values if I want to, and so on. Okay, like maybe this color, and that color, or something like that. Okay, so those are some of the ways that you can start to build color palettes in a graceful and thoughtful way, and collecting your fonts and so forth. And now we can actually get going and start to pull that stuff into XD.